Welcome back to the channel, and we're going to be doing lesson 11 on learning Greek by reading the Greek New Testament. Tom Eckman here, and today we're going to be looking at the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verse 22. We're going to tackle a single verse, primarily based on the fact that there's a lot of new vocabulary here. I hope to build on a lot of the principles and thoughts that Chris Morrison has developed and move forward from there, but before we look at the verse in particular and read through it, let me answer the unasked question that I know is out there, and that's the question about pronunciation. In my case, I'm simply going to be reading it based on the way I learned to pronounce it so that the letters are heard without focusing on particular methodology or phonology. Trust me, I learned French as my first foreign language and sat in a class. It was at a southern university and had a lot of students in there, sitting under a professor from Nice, France, and listened to them as they would read and say things like "Comment ça va?" and "Quelle heure est-il?" So I get it when you're talking about a language where people are actively communicating back and forth and you're learning in order to communicate, in order to be heard and understood. This, however, is not the case. I never learned Greek in order to be able to communicate it with anybody other from this in the sense of meaning. I'm looking for meaning. So while I do want to be able to pronounce it in a way that is will help you recognize the sounds that I'm making, I may not be everybody's taste in terms of the way that I do it. I'm going to try to handle the diphthongs consistently. And the one caveat I would say in my pronunciation is because I've worked with other foreign languages and almost all of them roll their R in some way. When I handle a row, I'm probably going to roll my R. I think that's something I almost can't get away from. So forgive me for that. If I'm wanting you to hear a row, as especially if you're an American and you're an English speaker, to hear an R like But like I said, hopefully you will forgive me for that particular item. So here we go. Epon un auto tes hina apokrisin domen tois pempsisen hemas ti leges peri se autu. All right. So let's take a look at all the unique vocabulary. It's about half of what we see here. First of all, you have apon, you've got apokrisin at the end of the first line there, domen, pempsisen, hemas, leges, and seautu. So quite a bit of new vocabulary there. So let's take a look at what those are. So apokrisin comes from apokrisis, which means answer. Domen actually comes from didωμι, so we'll talk about that when we get there. But and some of you may recognize from past lessons when you see that mu, epsilon, nu, that we're looking at a first person plural, right? So we have we might give, and then apon and apon. You hear me saying them the same way. Basically, I'm going to approach that alpha the same way I would in many other languages. I would say the omicron here. The only difference here is in the manuscripts, and this is a language issue. This is not a matter of meaning. They both mean they said. Apon is more of a second declension kind of ending. You might recognize that apon with an omicron nu is a first declension ending, typical first declension ending. And that was just a question of history, and I'm not a morphologist, and I'm not an etymologist. So, those pieces, you're welcome to go pursue somebody like a Bill Mounts and see what he has to say about the history behind this. But I can just tell you that this is one of those words that sort of shifted over time. And that, like I said, they both mean the same thing. It's just the way that you conjugate them. To give you a comparison for those of you who are interested, I can tell you that it's something like judgment in English. At the present time, judgment can either be Judgement or Judgment. And of course, they mean the same thing. There's no discussion about, okay, is it something different? They both mean exactly the same thing. It's simply two alternative spellings that both are valid. And that's what we're looking at here. In my case, because I lean toward what's called the majority of text manuscript theory, this is a typical standard, with the Omicron nu is a typical standard first aorist ending. So I'm going to go with that because that's what we would see in both the Textus Receptus and the majority of manuscripts. So I don't see any reason to depart from that personally, but that's a conviction, and I invite you to stay with me, whatever yours is, if you have a different one. But next we have hemas, which is a first-person personal pronoun, and it's just us. And then you have leges, which is you in the singular, or you say, and you probably recognize that from past discussions. That's coming from Lego, and we'll talk about that when we get there. Pempsison, which actually comes from pempo, and in this case is a participle, so it's sending. So we want to take a look at that. I know that Chris has already spoken a little bit about participles and how they work, and we're going to see a particular usage in this verse. And then finally, reflexive pronoun yourself there in se autu. So let's go back, just do a wooden translation, and then we'll walk it through. They said, therefore, to him, who are you? In order that answer we might give to the sending us. What you say concerning yourself. So, moving forward from there, if we take a look at the particular vocabulary that we're learning, apon is the first troublemaker, and you probably know that that's a very irregular verb for those of you who have done some Greek study. And if you haven't, there is a sort of a fixed number of irregular verbs. And what I mean by irregular in this case is they're very regular in their conjugation, but the stem changes depending on the tense that you're looking at. And so you can see that at the bottom. Before we come back and talk about it more, you see that Lego is your present tense stem, but then when you move to the other stems, the future, for instance, you have arrow. You're looking at that and going, what's the relationship? Well, there's no relationship. It's a very, very irregular verb. And like I said, there is a handful of 10 or 12, and you begin to recognize them over time. Just as you're reading, you begin to recognize, like, okay, I see arrow. I know that that's a future of Lego, but then it'll conjugate regularly once you know the stem. So in any case, apon, of course, is going to be your aorist, so that's what we see here. And you probably know Lego, arrow, apon, ereka for the future, and that's another one very strange, to look at that and say, well, that's a future tense stem, okay. But when you're looking at apon here, you're saying, well, that's a first singular. And you go, well, okay, I see apon here, but apon, I said, therefore to him, well, I doesn't fit. And if you're looking at the rest of the sentence, you're seeing this, we might give to the one sending us, so you're saying, okay, well, that's where if you know the conjugation, first singular and third plural are exactly the same in the first aorist. So we can look at this and go, okay, well, that's clearly in the context a third plural, again, from Lego. And I invite you over time to just sort of adjust your thinking to say, okay, there are just a handful of these very unusual verbs where there's a a major stem change where they don't look anything alike between the present, future, aorist, perfect, those kinds of stems. All right, let's take a look. Un, you probably know, is what's called a postpositive. It's never the first word in the sentence. There are a handful of words like that that you're not going to start the sentence with that word simply because it's the way Greek does it. In almost every other language I look at, that would be the first word, but not so in Greek. So, tis, one of the things that you want to notice here is that it is the third time that this word, this particular tis or who, is used in their questioning. This is they're coming and they're questioning John the Baptist, and they keep saying who. And we'll talk about that more in the future, but I just want you to recognize that within Judaism, this is a very common thing. Every fact is confirmed by 2 or 3 witnesses. Very, very common in the New Testament to see a string of 3 in confrontations or in questioning or in testing. You'll see a repetition of 3 times, and that's what we see here. We see this word tis coming up 3 times in a row, and this is the third one. All right, next we know that a hina clause. Chris has already introduced you to the idea of a hina clause as being something of purpose, so sometimes it gets translated as simply that. It can be in that, in order that is another way to tackle that. So both of those will work, but then we have apokrysin. In Greek word order, you might look at this and say, well, okay, he's focusing on, we got to have an answer. We're putting an answer. But typically, Greek is going to be a verb at the end. So to be typically subject, object, verb in terms of word order. That is a typical. But again, Greek can make all sorts of exceptions to that because it's an inflected language, because every word has some kind of the nouns and the verbs and the adjectives are all going to have some kind of an inflection or ending that will help you identify its part in the sentence. Here, what helps you is knowing that it's apokrysis and third declension noun. So when you see this new, you say, okay, I know a new is typically, if it's a noun, that's going to be an accusative singular ending, which would mean that it's going to be the direct object. That is the case here. They're looking to be able to give an answer. And again, no definite article. So it's like we're looking to give some kind of an answer. We're not definite about it. We don't know what it is. So we're just looking to find whatever that is that we can give as an answer. But again, that new should tell you accusative singular. All right. Next, we have domen, another unusual verb here. This is from what are called the me verbs. And there are not many me verbs, but the few verbs that we do work across or read across in the New Testament are important ones. And this is one of them, didωmι, I give, right? So we think about I give. How many times are we going to encounter that in the New Testament? Many. A couple others that you will probably know as being important to New Testament reading would be something like tithemi. So you hear that me ending again, and it's a very unusual conjugation, but we'll run across them more, I'm sure, over time. But tithemi is I put or I place or I lay. And then you have histemi, another one that another me verb you can hear, and that's I stand. And think about how many times the New Testament speaks about our standing or I'm standing somewhere. Romans 5, of course. So some very important verbs, but once you know the idea behind them, again, this is another one that because of its form, this is very unusual. This is actually an aorist. So, but because it's a subjunctive, you look at it and you go, okay, how can I recognize this? It comes from didωmι. I don't even see the beginning of the verb. Well, again, just understanding, you see this, uh, the delta, and then you see omega, you say, okay, that might be a lengthening, so it might be a delta omicron, could possibly be, or this circumflex might be the thing that tells me that it's lengthening, which is the case here. When you look at didωμι, you do have an omega there, but in some forms you have an omicron. So it's helpful. Hopefully you recognize the mu, epsilon, nu as the first plural, so we. But then, some of us, we're going to go, okay, where's that form and how do I get to it? And hopefully you have some cheats there to help. But again, you just need to recognize this as one of those unusual didωμι, or one of those unusual me verbs. Okay, so and a subjunctive, that's a subjunctive. Subjunctive is a lengthening of that connecting vowel. So that's what we have. All right, on we move to tois pempsison. You see that definite article, and that is what I would call a cheat, because you see that that's a dative plural with the iota sigma. And if you're astute, you might be looking over here and say, well, that might be a movable nu, which it is. And then sigma iota tells you it's a kind of a third declension ending, and all it's doing is it's swapping the iota and the sigma to tell you that it's a dative plural, which is the case. So that's a help. If you're looking for the root or the stem, you go, okay, that looks like pimp, and you can hear psi or psi, if some of you might say it that way, but I would probably say psi. Is that combination of a pi or a p and the sigma. So you could come up with this letter psi. So pulling those apart, you can say pimp, and if you know pimpo is I send, those kinds of ideas. So we've got we want to give an answer. In order that we might give an answer to the sending, because this is a participle. You've got a verbal stem here, and you've got a nominal ending. So when you see this noun kind of ending, but a verbal beginning, you should be thinking participle. So, and that indeed is what we have here. So hopefully that's helpful. But the idea here is, okay, sending, and if I see pimp sa, if I hear the sa, is the connecting, I'm going, okay, well, that's an aorist. So we know we have an aorist participle, right? It's not passive because you don't see a theta, which most of the time you're going to see in a passive. So you're thinking aorist active participle. You already know from the sigma iota or can that that lines up with your definite article here, and which tells you it's a dative plural. So you have all the ideas, and you know that it's the idea of around sending. So, but because of the definite article, this tells you that it is a participle that is being used as a noun. It's what's called a substantival participle. So it's speaking about the people, and they're wanting to give an answer. They're wanting to give an answer to whom? To the ones who sent us, or to those who sent us, however you want to our senders would be another way that you might be able to handle that clause, tois pempsison hemas. Okay, and all valid. So in any case, again, aorist active, dative, plural, masculine, all of those things you can see. And then this first person personal pronoun. And just for a help, for those of you who are kind of thinking, okay, a lot of personal pronouns in the New Testament. So here are the first and second person ones, but for today, we want to look at these first plurals. And you notice what they have in common, of course, is genitive plural, you should always be able to recognize, very consistent across every paradigm. But humes, or I'm sorry, hemes, hemon, hemin, hemas, And what we see here is a hemas, which tells you it's clearly accusative. And of course, plural, because otherwise we'd have ma, right? So in any case, hey to us, who are you? Is the way that I play with these ideas, because I look at the second plural, the y'all or all of you, and I say humes, humon, humin, humas, and say, well, okay, that's who is you. So who are you, or who are y'all? If you want to do it the Southern way, like I would. But for the first, hey, just to try to put something in your mind, it's an eta with the rough breathing mark. And for me, it's like, hey to us, who are you? And that's good enough for me to remember pretty much this whole paradigm. All right, moving forward. A couple of things left over and we're done. T leges, you probably recognize from earlier discussion. That comes from Lego, all right? And so with leges, you're saying, all right, I recognize that's a different inflection. And in English, we do the same thing. We do, I talk, you talk, he talks. And in Greek, this is one of the major inflected or marked forms, is this second singular, or you. And so T instead of tis, and so instead of who, we have a what here. What do you say? But it's, again, singular, and it's because they're addressing John the Baptist. So that makes very good sense as well. Peri is the preposition around or concerning, depending on the inflection of the end. And in this case, with the genitive, you have concerning or about. And in this case, you should recognize this is a genitive singular. And masculine, you can say, well, masculine, well, we're talking about John the Baptist. So that also makes very good sense to consider this as a masculine. All right, just a quick review of typical standard present active indicative. And the way I actually learned it when I was first learning Greek was to just say oase amenetiousi. Oase amenetiousi. And that's what we see here. Oase amenetiousi. Of course, this includes the connecting vowel, of course. I understand that. But for some of you, like me, it's just an easy way to begin to learn the paradigm, and repetition, helpful repetition. Well, that being said, let's do a quick, smooth transition, and that is therefore or so, or then, if you want to go with un, something like that. So I would probably in normal conversation go with something like so. So they said to him, who are you? In order that we might give an answer to the ones who sent us. What do you say about yourself? And of course, the Greek, what we see as a semicolon is their question mark. Last thing is, in terms of the interpretation and what we see, I would go back to this idea of the repetition of tis 3 times as they're sort of confronting John the Baptist looking for an answer. And unfortunately, I've seen in many of the English translations that the middle one, where they ask about, are you Elijah, gets translated as what then, or something like that. And they translate it as a what instead of a who. But I would argue that what we're seeing is 3 in a row because of this purpose of testing or looking for a confirmation. And very, very common in if you read through Matthew, the confrontations between Jesus and the Pharisees and Sadducees very often happen in 3s. Jesus' temptation in the wilderness, 3. And that's what we see here in John, that verse 22 is the tail end where they say, who are you? We need to give an answer. So they ask for that 3rd time, tis. And this should show us the importance of the identification of John the Baptist, and John using it to make sure that John the Baptist is clearly identified as the forerunner and not the Messiah.